NFL player contracts keep increasing, making teams in a constant cycle of juggling rosters in order to stay beneath the salary cap. Some contracts are well-deserved, like Patrick Mahomes, but others can be considered a little too generous for what the players are bringing to the field each Sunday and how long they will still be at top playing condition. So today, we're going to be looking at the most overpaid players from each NFL team. Now, before we get started, let me know in the comment section down below who you think is the most overpaid player in the NFL right now. On top of that, we're giving away a PlayStation 5 on this YouTube channel for anyone that's subscribed and hit our notification bell. If you could take a moment to sack that like button for the YouTube algorithm as well, that'd be very much appreciated. And now that we got all that out of the way, break! Mic check 1 2 1 2. Let's start with the Arizona Cardinals. DJ Humphries started off as a rookie with a not so flattering nickname. Humphries' head coach at the time, Bruce Arians, gave him the nickname Knee Deep, explaining that you needed to keep a knee in his rear end every day to keep the offensive lineman motivated. DJ Humphries is in the middle of a 3-year, $43.8 million contract with $29 million guaranteed that doesn't expire until 2023. Although offensive tackles aren't flashy by any means, Humphries hasn't been on a Pro Bowl roster or named an All-Pro yet and committed 13 penalties just last season. Also, he has been injury prone while missing 37 games in his previous 5 seasons, which makes one wonder if he'll remain on the field for an entire season. For the Atlanta Falcons, we have Julio Jones. Yes, Julio Jones. He has been struggling with a hamstring injury this fall, but with a 3-year, $66 million contract with $64 million guaranteed that was just extended until 2024 last month, that is a lot of money for a 31-year-old wide receiver. It is a lot, especially when Jones' numbers began to decline last season. I guess I'm a little bit bitter because I selected him for my fantasy football team with my first pick, but the last time he had 10 touchdowns in a season was 2012, yet Jones is the second highest paid wide receiver in the league behind DeAndre Hopkins. The Falcons could be dreading next season when looking at their cap space, as Julio Jones is hogging all of their money. The Baltimore Ravens, for the most part, have some pretty nice contracts on the roster, but if I'd had to pick someone, it would be Calais Campbell, who they traded a 5th-round pick for last offseason. But even Campbell has a 2-year, $25 million, $20 million guaranteed deal that expires in 2022. I guess you can consider him to be a little overpaid because he's 34 years old, and even if he's a complete flop, the Baltimore Ravens will still owe him $15 million next season. But the good news is, so far, Campbell has been worth the investment. He hasn't been the sack king that he was in the past, but he's exactly what the Ravens were hoping he'd be when they brought him in. On to the Buffalo Bills. Their most overpaid player is their center, Mitch Morse. In 2019, Morse was the highest paid lineman in the league, and his 4-year, $44.5 million contract with $26.2 million guaranteed doesn't expire until 2023. However, in 2019, when the whistle blew against Buffalo, it was typically Mitch Morse who was on the receiving end of the yellow flag. Missing out on Pro Bowl or All-Pro honors last year, he will really need to redeem himself to earn his big paycheck. For the Carolina Panthers, who look a lot different this season, defensive tackle Kawan Short is still in Carolina as he recently signed a $13.6 million extension, making his 5-year contract that expires in 2022 worth $80.5 million with $35 million guaranteed. Panther fans, frustrated with the team's start and what they're paying for Short, are already rumbling for him to be traded. Also, Short has barely even played this season, spending most of his time on the IR. Now, for the Chicago Bears, this should come as no surprise to anyone. You remember the shocking trade of 2019 when Khalil Mack was traded from the Raiders to the Chicago Bears? This was one of John Gruden's first moves. Khalil Mack, an outside linebacker who sometimes gets to the opposing quarterback, but really not as often as he should for the amount he's getting getting paid is in the middle of a 6-year, $141 million contract with $90 million guaranteed that doesn't expire until 2025. Now look, man, I'm not saying Khalil Mack isn't a stud, because he is an absolute stud. I'm saying that the Bears are not getting the return on investment that they were hoping to get once they traded for him, but props to the man for cashing out, because the Bears owe Khalil Mack over $80 million per year. Yikes. You gotta feel bad for the Cincinnati Bengals. They needed defense, and they took the Minnesota Vikings bait cornerback TREY when he entered the free agent market this offseason, and although giving up a 107.9 passing rating to opposing quarterbacks in 2019, Cincinnati decided to give him a 3-year, $42 million contract with a $15 million guarantee at 31 years old. The sucky part about all this is TREY has yet to see the turf this year in that orange and black, as he tore a pectoral muscle in training camp, which has him put on the IR. For the Cleveland Browns, we have defensive end Olivier Vernon, who has an $85 million contract with $52.5 million in guarantees, but thankfully this expires in 2021. The Browns could have released Olivier Vernon and avoided paying the final $15.5 on his contract, but the team still has him on their roster. Despite him only playing 36% of the defensive snaps so far this season, Vernon, who has already struggled with an injury this season, was plagued with them in 2019, recording just 3.5 sacks. Now comes time for the Dallas Cowboys. In my opinion, and as a Cowboy fan, I think this is one of the most overpaid players in the league. Ezekiel Elliott is easily the most overpaid player on the Cowboys roster. He recently signed his extension, and it doesn't expire until 2027, which at that date, he will basically be the world's oldest running back. Not really, but with a 6-year, $90 million contract with $50.1 million guaranteed, that's a lot of money for even the best player. Elliott has run for a lot of yards, inching close to 100 per game for his career, but there is one blatant asterisk in his story, as the Cowboys have just won one playoff game while Elliott was on the roster. Now the Denver Broncos. Another player who isn't as widely known but is the overpaid member of the Broncos is offensive tackle Ja'Wuan James. He will cost the Broncos $27 million over the next 2 seasons, which only drops down to $19 million if he is let go after this season. But John Elway cannot do anything for a while with James yet, as he opted out due to COVID-19 concerns. His 4-year, $51 million contract with $32 million guaranteed expires in 2023. That is a lot of money for a right tackle who has only played complete seasons half of his career, doesn't have a Pro Bowl or All-Pro patch, and is not suiting up at all this season. Now for the Detroit Lions, that's a different dumpster fire. There are a lot of defensive ends on this list, and here is another on the Lions' edge. Trey Flowers. The former Patriot is not a bad player at all. As a matter of fact, he's pretty good. However, he is very expensive and a big liability for the Lions, as his 5-year, $90 million contract with $56 million guaranteed doesn't expire until 2024. This one is really tough to say for the Green Bay Packers, and I almost want to kick myself for saying it, because Aaron Rodgers is one of my favorite quarterbacks, and he's been defying the odds of father time this fall, and through the first few games has been putting up rock star offensive numbers. However, when looking at the big picture, his extended contract that doesn't expire until 2024 is worth $134 million with $98.7 million guaranteed. This hits the Packers salary cap hard, as it takes up almost 20% of the Packers payroll. That would be considered overpaid, even for an MVP quarterback. For the Houston Texans, we have Whitney Mercilus, the other defensive end for the Houston Texans, who is locked in a contract that pays $54 million with $28.5 million guaranteed and expires in 2024. Mercilus, who is 30 years old, hasn't recorded more than 7 sacks since 2015, and he hasn't made a Pro Bowl or has been named an All-Pro. He does seem to be having a better season so far, logging a couple of sacks early in the season, but he will need to totally redeem himself to overcome his expensiveness. When the Indianapolis Colts golden boy Andrew Luck unexpectedly retired, they just didn't know what to do, so they decided to turn around and overpay Jacoby Brissett, hoping that he would be at least a suitable replacement. Thus, The Colts inked him to a 2-year, $30 million contract with $20 million guaranteed that goes until 2021. Guess what? He was horrific in 2019, and the Colts didn't have the patience to test him out for another season. So instead, they took the ball from him, and Brissett is now playing behind another quarterback that they overpaid in Phillip Rivers. Thus, the Colts are paying a lot for a guy who is just wearing a headset every game, and his only chance of playing is if Phillip Rivers goes down with an injury. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, we need to bring up Andrew Norwell, who was signed to a ridiculous $66.5 million contract with $30 million guaranteed in 2018, making him the highest paid guard at the time. That mammoth contract expires in 2023, but last year Norwell didn't even come close to earning his paycheck. He was on and off the field with a lower leg injury and also had many penalties when he was suited up that moved the Jaguars back when they had a hard time advancing down the field in normal circumstances. For the Kansas City Chiefs, it is really hard to criticize a team that is coming off of a Super Bowl win, but there is a member of that team whose $104 million 5-year contract worth $62.3 million guaranteed that expires in 2024 is considered overpaid. That is defensive end Frank Clark. Last season, he did make a Pro Bowl, but battled many injuries and was called for quite a few penalties. Plus, he seemed to almost get to the opposing quarterback a lot of times, but the reliability just wasn't there. Frank Clark is only 27, but his body seemed much older in 2019, which is concerning since the Chiefs are depending on his production for several more years. Up next, we have the Las Vegas Raiders, and in a city that's known for placing big bets, the Raiders surprisingly don't have many outlandish contracts on their payroll. It could probably be said otherwise about their construction fees, but offensive tackle Trent Brown, whose $66 million contract with $36.3 million guaranteed that expires in 2023 is one player that could be considered grossly overpaid. Brown is better at pass blocking as he is 6'8" after all, but only being really good at 50% of your job is not enough to be the second highest paid right tackle in all of the NFL. Now, for the LA Chargers, Melvin Ingram III is another defensive end who is in a big deal of $64 million with $34 million guaranteed that expires in 2021. He has been a good enough pass rusher to earn Pro Bowl nods, but he is 31 and is getting slower to reach the quarterback and even slower to bring them down. His sacks and hurries have decreased over the last couple of years, and in the final season of his monster deal, even with a recent restructured contract, he hits the Chargers salary cap with $14 million. That is eye-popping when no one else on the roster except for Joey Bosa makes more than $12 million a year. For the other LA team, the LA Rams, the starting quarterback, Jared Goff, remember the Jared Goff that went 0 for 7 last season? His $134 million contract with $110 million guaranteed is not up until 2025. That guaranteed money is the largest in NFL history. He did go to a Super Bowl, but he played horrifically, and then the following year perhaps had a case of the yips. For the hope and sanity of the Rams, let's have optimism that 2019 was a fluke, as they owe Jared Goff $95 million over the next 3 seasons, and the Rams are not getting out of that one. I remember being a Dallas Cowboy fan and being really sad when I found out the Miami Dolphins signed Byron Jones. Then I saw the amount they paid Byron Jones, and I really was happy that the Cowboys no longer had Byron Jones, because he got paid $82.5 million with a $54.4 million guarantee that doesn't expire until 2025. Jones was set back with a groin injury, and with the media calling him the Dolphins' best player, he needs to make a quick comeback to earn the respect of Miami and, more importantly, earn his paycheck. For the Minnesota Vikings, obviously I really want to say Kirk Cousins because he makes a ton of money, but we have to give our most overpaid player honors to linebacker Anthony Barr, whose $67.5 million contract with $33 million guaranteed goes until 2024. In the first year of his 5-year deal last season, his name wasn't called very often getting tackles, which is what his job entails. Last season, with only 1 interception and 1 forced fumble, that is hardly worth the money he was getting paid. He is a mentor to those in the locker room, and that's all he will be for most, if not all, of this season. For the New England Patriots, this one's really hard because Bill Belichick is really good at managing cap space, but they don't really have that many overpaid players on the roster. However, safety Devin McCourty's $23 million with $17 million guaranteed contract that expires in 2022 is probably considered overpaid, as he is turning 33 years old soon, and his log tackles have gone down dramatically. Prior to the 2020 season, the Patriots gave away some really good players but kept McCourty, which makes us seem to think that they probably know something that we don't. For the New Orleans Saints, I'd have to say the most overpaid player is Taysom Hill. His extension expires in 2022, and his contract is $21 million with $16 million guaranteed. He was once considered a guy who could do anything and perhaps the future of the franchise, but really, he hasn't contributed anything at all. Hill has only attempted 13 passes and has completed 6 for his career, and this season has been thrown in for a trick play or two that has not been so successful. Now, the Saints said they might use him in the red zone. Okay, wherever you think you can get your money's worth, but the Saints better start looking for Brees' successor, because at this point in time, Hill seems flat and is still extremely overpaid. For the New York Giants, who have just selected an offensive tackle number 4 overall in the past draft, also have an overpaid offensive tackle in Nate Solder, whose $62 million, $34.8 million guaranteed contract doesn't expire until 2022. His contract is hitting $16 million on the payroll this season in dead cap space and another $19.5 million. The 32-year-old has never even made a Pro Bowl when he was younger and doesn't do his job very well. He won't have the opportunity to prove his worth to the Giants this season, as he opted out due to COVID-19 concerns. For the Giants to remove him from the roster this coming offseason, it will cost them $6.5 million, which is another big ouch. For the New York Jets, it's almost a tie, because if you asked me this a week ago, I'd say it's easily Le'Veon Bell. However, now that Le'Veon Bell is gone, it's going to be CJ Mosley. And as a matter of fact, even if Le'Veon Bell was still on the roster, it would have still been CJ Mosley, because CJ Mosley makes $85 million with $51 million of that contract being guaranteed. Mosley was out most of last season with an injury and has opted out the 2020 season due to COVID-19. For the Philadelphia Eagles, this is no shock. Quarterback Carson Wentz gets paid $128 million with $108 million being guaranteed. This expires in 2025 and puts him as the most overpaid player on the Eagles roster. It seems as if he has been injured more than healthy, especially when it counts, such as the playoffs. Oh, and during, the Super Bowl. Wentz, although being paid as a star, hasn't really proved himself and has only made it to 1 Pro Bowl. He still has time as he is young, but if he shows that he was overrated and undeserving, the Eagles are still married to him until 2024. His cap value of $102 million from 2021 to 2023 could be considered a horrible business decision, and I feel like the Eagles are getting ready to move on from him because they already drafted a quarterback in the 2nd round this past NFL draft in Jalen Hurts. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, we have Ben Roethlisberger, who so far this season has proved many wrong by leading the Steelers to victories, but his surgically repaired elbow doesn't seem quite the same, especially when it comes to long passes down the field. Also in 2018, he had a lot of interceptions, so that negative trend may return after the season gets a little more underway. Since Roethlisberger's $68 million, $37.5 million guaranteed isn't up until 2022, the Steelers' main man is Big Ben for the next 2 seasons. His cap hit is what is mind-blowing, $41.3 million with a dead cap charge of $22.3 million. He is way overpaid, not only because he is up there in years, but because no one else on the Steelers roster makes even half of what he does. For the San Francisco 49ers, they have some big contracts, but most of them are easy to get out of, and Jimmy Garoppolo right now is basically year to year. That puts defensive tackle ARIK Armstead and his $85 million with $40 million guaranteed contract that doesn't end until 2025 as the most overpaid player for the 49ers. He did have 10 sacks last season in a stellar year for San Fran's defense that fell just short of a Super Bowl victory, but like many on our list, hasn't made a Pro Bowl or been named an All-Pro, and he has officially entered his 6th season in the league. For the Seattle Seahawks, who are pretty good at getting their money, but defensive tackle Jaron Reed's $23 million contract with $14 million guaranteed that expires in 2022 is overpaid as he has had trouble staying on the field. He was kept off the field not due to injuries, but off the field issues, as he was suspended 6 games last season for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy in an incident involving domestic violence. When returning after the suspension, he was missing tackles literally left and right and was nowhere near the player he was a few seasons back. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there is a member of the offense that is the most overpaid player on the Buccaneers, and it's not Tom Brady. It's a guy that is lined up in front of him, tasked with protecting him, an offensive tackle, Donovan Smith. Donovan Smith makes $41.3 million, 27 of that is guaranteed, and it's up in 2022. He makes more than everyone on the roster except for Mike Evans and Shaq Barrett. The difference is that Smith isn't a Pro Bowler or an All-Pro, and if that isn't bad enough, the left tackle already has 5 penalties just 4 games into the 2020 season. That's not a good start to gaining a repertoire with your quarterback, especially if your quarterback is considered to be the greatest QB of all time. The Tennessee Titans said their vows with quarterback Ryan Tannehill in the form of a $118 million, $91 million guaranteed contract that lasts until 2024. Tannehill is a player that didn't make a Pro Bowl until he was 31 and is now 32 and is overpaid. Tannehill has had trouble staying on the field as he has not started more than 13 games since 2015. He put up a good, in fact great passer rating in 2019, but he had a solid rusher in Derrick Henry who ran for over 100 yards a game and certainly helped take the pressure off of him. For this 2020 season, Tannehill will have to prove that he can be pressured in a drop back and it will not lead to a sack, something that he has struggled with in the past. And for the Washington football team, you have to feel really sorry for Alex Smith and all that he has been through. Smith's contract that ends in 2023 is worth $94 million with $71 million guaranteed. He is the highest paid player on Washington's roster and has not played a game until recently, but prior to that, in almost 2 years. Smith has to overcome one of the most gruesome injuries that can ever occur to an NFL player and has had real life-threatening setbacks, but the harsh fact is, he was Washington's third-string quarterback up until recently. Because of all he has been through, and he is a mentor to many young players, he will probably not be released anytime soon. But that being said, he is overpaid, but that isn't Smith's responsibility, and the Washington franchise have their own problems and could benefit from keeping him around. I'm your boy Microphone, and I'll catch you guys in the next upload.